The darkest chapters in recent European history. The Bosnian Genocide. This brutal event, often referred to as ethnic cleansing, saw thousands of innocent people targeted simply because of their ethnicity and religion. In Bosnia, ethnic cleansing primarily targeted the Bosniak people, who are mostly Muslims, though Croats and others were also victimized. Between 1992 and 1995, Bosnian Serb forces carried out carefully planned attacks across Bosnia to achieve this terrifying goal. Mass killings, forced expulsions, torture, and widespread violence were common methods. Entire villages were destroyed, leaving survivors with nothing to return to. Victims were forced to abandon everything they owned and flee, often losing family members along the way. One chilling part of this systematic violence was the creation of concentration camps. Life inside these camps was beyond horrific. Survivors described being beaten severely, starved, and tortured daily. Prisoners suffered constant humiliation and inhumane conditions. Imagine hundreds of people packed tightly in small, dirty spaces without proper sanitation, food, or water. Prisoners were regularly subjected to extreme cruelty, including sexual violence and execution without reason or warning. This terror was designed not only to punish prisoners, but also to send a message to others, forcing people to flee and never return. But these camps were just one element of a broader strategy of terror. Another haunting aspect was the siege of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This siege lasted for an unbelievable 1,425 days, from April 1992 until October 1995. It was the longest siege of a capital city in modern European history. During those dreadful years, around 400,000 residents of Sarajevo faced unimaginable daily horrors. Serbian forces surrounding the city relentlessly bombed and fired bullets into civilian neighborhoods without mercy. Snipers targeted anyone outside, including men, women, and even children. Something as simple as stepping out to fetch water or bread could mean instant death. The residents of Sarajevo were cut off from basic necessities. Food became scarce, electricity was often unavailable, and clean drinking water was nearly impossible to find. Markets, schools, hospitals, places usually considered safe, were intentionally targeted. One of the most shocking incidents happened at the Markale marketplace, where innocent people buying groceries became victims of deadly shelling attacks, not just once, but twice. In February 1994, an attack killed 68 people and wounded nearly 150 more injured. Then again, in August 1995, another 43 people lost their lives, with 75 more injured. Beyond the violence against people, Serbian forces also deliberately targeted cultural and religious sites, aiming to erase the identity and history of the Bosniak people. Libraries filled with priceless historical documents burned down, mosques and heritage sites were deliberately destroyed, and historical monuments were reduced to rubble. One example was the National Library in Sarajevo, deliberately set on fire during the siege, destroying countless irreplaceable historical records. Another was the symbolic Old Bridge in Mostar, a cherished historical landmark intentionally bombed and destroyed in 1993. Alongside these brutal acts, there was another horrific tool used in ethnic cleansing: sexual violence. Sexual violence was intentionally employed as a weapon of war, aimed at humiliating, degrading, and traumatizing victims and communities. Between 10,000 to 50,000 women and girls, mostly Bosniaks, suffered sexual violence at the hands of Serb forces. These acts were intended not only to physically harm, but to psychologically shatter entire communities, ensuring the trauma lasted generations. Women who became pregnant from these assaults were often detained to prevent them from having abortions. This deliberate cruelty aimed to permanently change the ethnic makeup of the population. creating an unbearable stigma and trauma. The scale and brutality of these acts shocked the world. The term ethnic cleansing entered global awareness, symbolizing these unspeakable atrocities. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia later recognized systematic sexual violence as a crime against humanity, deeply linked to the genocidal intentions of ethnic cleansing. By 1995, this ruthless campaign forced around 2,700,000 people, more than half of Bosnia's population, from their homes. Most fled to areas controlled by their ethnic group, causing what became known as voluntary ethnic restructuring. But this movement was anything but voluntary. It was forced upon them through violence and fear. Villages that once flourished with life turned into ghost towns. Streets that once echoed with children's laughter fell silent, haunted by painful memories and broken lives. When looking back at the systematic ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, it is crucial to remember that these atrocities were not spontaneous. They were calculated, planned, and methodically executed to achieve a terrifying political goal: to create ethnically pure territories. To truly understand how such horrific events could unfold in a modern European country, we need to look back at the origins of this conflict. How did a country like Yugoslavia, known for its cultural diversity and unity, collapse so dramatically? Yugoslavia was once a shining example of unity among different cultures and religions. It was created after World War I, and by the mid-20th century, it included several different ethnic groups such as Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats, Macedonians, Montenegrins, and Slovenes. Despite these differences, Yugoslavia managed to maintain peace and stability for many decades, largely due to the strong leadership of President Josip Broz Tito. Tito was a powerful figure who ruled Yugoslavia from the 1940s until his death in 1980. Under Tito, Yugoslavia enjoyed relative harmony and prosperity, as he skillfully balanced the demands and needs of various ethnic groups. He promoted a common Yugoslav identity, trying to unite people beyond their ethnic and religious differences. But there was one critical weakness in Tito's Yugoslavia. Unity heavily relied on his strong leadership and the power of his Communist Party. Nationalistic feelings and ethnic tensions were largely suppressed rather than resolved. Once Tito died in 1980, cracks began to appear almost immediately. Without Tito's charismatic leadership, these underlying tensions quickly resurfaced, setting the stage for future conflict. After Tito's death, the country faced a political vacuum. There was no clear leader strong enough to maintain the balance he had kept for decades. Ethnic tensions, which had been quietly simmering below the surface, quickly began to boil over. Various nationalist politicians saw this situation as an opportunity to gain power by exploiting ethnic divisions. Throughout the 1980s, nationalist sentiments grew stronger in many parts of Yugoslavia. Politicians started to openly discuss separation and independence. As the central authority weakened, republics such as Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia started to pursue their own political interests, often conflicting with one another. Another factor contributing to the crisis was the weakening of communism throughout Europe. In the late 1980s, the communist systems across Eastern Europe began collapsing, most notably with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. Yugoslavia, once part of the broader communist bloc, was deeply affected by these global changes. As communism lost influence, nationalist movements gained popularity, fueling the flames of division. By the early 1990s, ethnic divisions became clearly visible during elections. The first multi-party elections in Bosnia, held in November 1990, showed voters casting ballots strictly along ethnic lines. This election gave power to nationalist parties, including the Bosniak Party of Democratic Action, the Serb Democratic Party, and the Croatian Democratic Union. Instead of encouraging unity, these parties deliberately promoted ethnic identity, reinforcing divisions rather than bringing people together. Ethnic tensions quickly escalated into confrontations. Serbia, led by nationalist President Slobodan Milosevic, aggressively pushed for a powerful, centralized Yugoslavia dominated by Serbs. On the other hand, Slovenia and Croatia sought independence and greater autonomy. Milosevic strategically took control of key political positions, giving Serbia disproportionate influence in Yugoslav affairs. Other republics naturally opposed this Serbian dominance, creating further resentment and mistrust. As Yugoslavia started breaking apart, Bosnia found itself particularly vulnerable due to its mixed ethnic population. According to the 1991 census, Bosnia consisted of roughly 44% Bosniaks, 31% Serbs, 17% Croats, and other minorities. While such diversity could have been Bosnia's strength, nationalist politicians saw this as a weakness they could exploit. In 1992, Bosnia held a referendum on independence, which Bosniaks and Croats largely supported, while Serbs strongly opposed it. The independence vote passed, and Bosnia declared itself independent from Yugoslavia in April 1992. Serbian nationalists in Bosnia, backed by Milosevic and Serbian forces, rejected this independence, quickly igniting violence. Initially, the Yugoslav army, controlled mainly by Serbs, tried to maintain Yugoslavia's unity by force. But when this failed, the army strategically withdrew, leaving behind heavy weapons, soldiers, and equipment for Bosnian Serb forces. This gave Serb forces an overwhelming military advantage right from the start, making resistance by other groups very difficult. The international community, recognizing the potential for violence, placed an arms embargo on all sides. While intended to prevent escalation, this embargo disproportionately harmed Bosniak and Croatian defenders who lacked sufficient weaponry. Meanwhile, Bosnian Serb forces had already inherited much of Yugoslavia's military power. The imbalance created by this arms embargo and the Yugoslav army's actions paved the way for the tragic events we described earlier. Without adequate protection, Bosniaks and other minority groups faced brutal campaigns of ethnic cleansing by Serb forces who enjoyed a significant military advantage. When countries fall into conflict, the violence does not start on its own. Usually, it is sparked by influential people who intentionally stir up hatred for their benefit. One of the most notorious figures behind the conflict was Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic became the leader of Serbia in the late 1980s and quickly gained popularity by promising Serbs a powerful, unified country. However, his vision of unity was exclusive, aimed specifically at expanding Serbian power at the expense of other ethnic groups. Milosevic knew the best way to gain support was by exploiting people's fears and grievances. He took control of newspapers, television, and radio stations, ensuring the Serbian people only heard messages that made them fear their neighbors. He claimed that Serbs were victims, facing threats from Croats, Bosniaks, and other ethnic groups, making ordinary people suspicious and hostile toward each other. To rally support, Milosevic frequently used historical memories, reminding Serbs of their past struggles and portraying other groups as threats to Serbian culture and safety. He openly talked about creating a Greater Serbia, a country that would unite all territories inhabited by Serbs, even if that meant forcibly removing others. By framing his goal as a righteous struggle for national survival, Milosevic set the stage for the ethnic violence that followed. Another key figure behind the chaos was Radovan Karadzic. Karadzic was the leader of the Bosnian Serb political party, known as the Serb Democratic Party. He directly orchestrated campaigns of ethnic cleansing, openly calling for non-Serbs to be expelled from areas Serbs wanted for themselves. Karadzic skillfully used political rallies and speeches to spread fear and hatred. He painted Bosniaks as dangerous outsiders, suggesting they threatened the very existence of the Serbian people. He promoted the creation of an independent Bosnian Serb state, known as Republika Srpska, and armed his supporters to ensure this vision became a terrifying reality. One of Karadzic's darkest statements hinted that Bosniaks would simply disappear if Bosnia chose independence, clearly showing his violent intentions. Later, he would become infamous for the brutal atrocities committed under his command, including mass murders and forced deportations. Working closely with Karadzic was a military leader named Ratko Mladic. Mladic commanded Bosnian Serb forces and quickly earned a reputation for his ruthless approach. He enthusiastically supported the idea of ethnic cleansing, believing violence was necessary to achieve Serbian dominance. Mladic's actions spoke louder than his words. Under his command, troops committed horrific massacres, including the Srebrenica genocide, which we will examine in greater detail later. Mladic was known to personally oversee attacks, showing no hesitation about targeting civilians to achieve his goals. But Serbian leaders were not the only ones exploiting nationalism. Croatia's president, Franjo Tuđman, was also deeply involved. Tuđman shared a similar nationalist vision, promoting the idea of a greater Croatia that would unite all Croats. Just like Milosevic, Tuđman believed ethnic homogeneity was crucial, meaning minority groups would need to be removed from territories he desired. Tuđman was not shy about expressing his nationalist ambitions. He openly discussed dividing Bosnia between Croatia and Serbia, essentially erasing the country from the map. Although not as widely recognized as Milosevic or Karadzic, Tuđman's actions contributed significantly to the ethnic violence, particularly against Bosniaks in areas dominated by Croatian forces. To make things worse, these leaders effectively weaponized the media. Using carefully chosen language, nationalist media outlets dehumanized opposing ethnic groups, referring to Bosniaks as Turks or Islamic fundamentalists and Croats as fascists. This manipulation of public opinion convinced many ordinary people to accept and even participate in violence they previously never imagined possible. It is important to note these divisions were not inevitable. Before nationalist leaders stirred up hatred, many Bosnians lived peacefully side by side. Marriages between ethnic groups were common, friendships flourished, and people generally got along without major issues. It took deliberate, repeated efforts by nationalist leaders to create the divisions that ultimately tore Bosnia apart. By stirring up fear, anger, and resentment, these politicians created a climate where ethnic cleansing seemed acceptable or even necessary. They knew exactly what they were doing and deliberately chose to ignore the terrible consequences their actions would have for millions of innocent people. These politicians were not mindless villains. They were intelligent, calculating individuals who knew precisely how to manipulate public opinion, using nationalism as a powerful tool. Their actions remind us how dangerous unchecked political ambition can be, especially when leaders prioritize power over humanity. Among the many tragedies that occurred during the Bosnian Genocide, one event stands out as the most shocking and horrifying: the Srebrenica massacre. This tragedy is remembered as Europe's darkest hour since World War II, highlighting both the brutality of the conflict and the failure of the international community to protect innocent lives. Srebrenica was a small town in eastern Bosnia. In 1993, as violence spread across the country, the United Nations designated Srebrenica a safe area. This meant it was supposed to be protected from attacks, providing a safe haven for thousands of Bosniak civilians fleeing from surrounding violence. By 1995, Srebrenica had become overcrowded, filled with refugees seeking protection under the United Nations. The town, originally home to about 10,000 people, now held more than 40,000 desperate civilians, mostly Bosniaks, who believed they were safe from harm. But this sense of security was tragically misplaced. Despite being officially protected by United Nations peacekeepers, known as UNPROFOR, Srebrenica remained dangerously vulnerable. The peacekeepers, mostly Dutch soldiers, were lightly armed and vastly outnumbered by surrounding Bosnian Serb forces. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb military leaders decided to seize Srebrenica. Led by General Ratko Mladic, their forces launched a brutal offensive named Operation Krivaja 95. This attack was meticulously planned and aimed specifically at capturing Srebrenica and driving out or killing its Bosniak population. As the attack began, panic quickly spread through the town. Civilians desperately ran to the United Nations compound in nearby Potocari, hoping for protection. Thousands gathered around the compound, trusting that the United Nations soldiers would defend them. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a horrific situation, surrounded by hostile forces with nowhere to escape. Within hours, Bosnian Serb forces overran Srebrenica, easily breaking through the weak United Nations defenses. General Mladic triumphantly entered the town and openly declared revenge against the Bosniak population. His chilling words, captured on video, left no doubt about the violence that was about to unfold. What followed was unimaginable. Bosnian Serb troops quickly separated the men and boys from the women and children. Women, elderly, and young children were loaded onto buses and trucks and forcibly transported to Bosniak-controlled areas. Men and boys, however, faced a far more terrifying fate. Over the next several days, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were systematically murdered. Victims were taken to isolated locations, lined up, and shot, often after being held captive without food or water for days. Many were buried in mass graves, some hastily hidden to cover up evidence. One of the worst massacre sites was a warehouse in Kravica, where over 1,000 men were brutally executed in just a few hours. Survivors who escaped the killings described scenes of absolute horror: bodies piled high, cries of victims pleading for mercy, and relentless gunfire echoing throughout the night. Meanwhile, thousands of Bosniak men tried to escape through nearby forests, desperately hoping to reach Bosniak-held territory. Many of them were ambushed by Bosnian Serb forces waiting along escape routes. These men were either killed on the spot or captured and later executed. This massacre was the deadliest atrocity on European soil since the Second World War. It shocked the world, not only because of its scale, but because it occurred under the watchful eyes of the international community. United Nations peacekeepers were physically present in Srebrenica, yet proved powerless or unwilling to stop the massacre. The role of the Dutch peacekeepers during these tragic events has been deeply criticized. Although outnumbered, their inability to take decisive action had catastrophic consequences. When the peacekeepers called for NATO airstrikes to halt the Serb advance, Bosnian Serb forces threatened to execute captured Dutch soldiers. Afraid for their own lives, the peacekeepers stepped back, essentially surrendering Srebrenica without meaningful resistance. In some cases, Dutch soldiers even assisted in separating families, unintentionally facilitating the massacre. These actions, or lack thereof, remain a dark stain on the United Nations and the international community, illustrating how ineffective international protection can be without genuine commitment. Furthermore, there were disturbing claims that evidence of these crimes was deliberately hidden or destroyed. For example, crucial video recordings taken by Dutch peacekeepers reportedly went missing or were intentionally erased, raising serious questions about accountability and responsibility. The Srebrenica massacre eventually became the centerpiece of international justice efforts. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia officially declared the massacre an act of genocide, recognizing that the killings were intended to destroy, at least partially, the Bosniak population in that area.